I am so much looking forward to sharing this conversation with Toni Theisen with you. Toni is energetic, compassionate, and always seeking new pathways to understanding and making connections between people. She's a brilliant, award-winning educator and leader. She's also a kind and loyal friend and a deeply engaged community member. But oh my goodness, be ready to be invited into and challenged by new ways of thinking about identity, cultures, society, and yourself. Toni is all about inclusion, all about us taking a look at how we invite others in or leave others out, how we give them a voice or keep them silent. I have loved watching her over the years challenge everybody, educators, community members, government officials, me, herself, to learn new things, think in new ways, experiment, 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 all on behalf of a saner, happier, more inclusive world. Come on in, experience Toni's fire hose. She'll wake up your brain and your spirit. Enjoy the podcast. I'm Norah Jones. Welcome to It's About Language. This podcast connects language and culture to life, learning, and hope. You'll experience insightful conversations with creative leaders in the fields of education, business, arts, and science. My guests shed light on the impact of language and culture on individuals and society as they share their stories and experiences. You'll be informed and inspired as we explore how language and culture make us human and bring hope in the midst of a challenging world. And it is my great pleasure to welcome Toni Theisen today. Hi, Toni.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. How's it going in Colorado?
It's a little cold. We have some snow, but it's bright and sunny. And I think next
Wonderful.
week it'll be warmer.
Well,
So,
you live in a beautiful area there in Fort Collins. And Toni, I'm delighted to have you today with a conversation because you bring so many unique viewpoints and insights and breakthroughs into the world language education and world language thinking. And among the things that you have said to me is about that teaching. I know it's a shock to some, but it's not a monologue. It's a dialogue. How have you lived that? What does that mean to you?
well, for me, it means inclusiveness. It means that I can't be the only person that's making decisions or keep myself in a silo or keep myself locked in a room. I need to really communicate with so many people that are involved in the teaching world, including the students, because the students really need their voice. And my dialogue has expanded over the years because I taught French for 40 years, but now I'm the director of world languages and our dual language program. And the dual language program has brought a lot of humility to my perspective because I needed to learn more about how do these students learn. First of all, being with the elementary. Secondly, with being involved in different ways with heritage and native speakers as part of a dual language program. And I needed to know about what does learning look like and what does connection look like and what does connection look like with families. And I've had so many opportunities to broaden my perspective to think a little bit about and more about equity, access, and sustainability. With dialogue comes sustainability, slowly by slowly.
Why is that true? What does dialogue do to create that sustainability and that equity?
Well, networks. We need networks. I often think about some of the spider stories from Africa when they talk a little bit about how the spiders weave the webs in a positive way because it's all about connection. But as the legends go, when it's time to change, spiders dismantle their webs and they start new ones. And if you think about that, we use the word networking a lot. And if you think about it in the reaction of, in a technical word, we even use, the things like the World Wide Web. We really use a lot of spider analogies because spiders are very important connections in the world. And they let us know when things are not going well. So I think just having an opportunity to have networks brings more sustainability because you have more people who are talking who can add to the conversation and add to the building. Because, the topic that I'm working with and talking about today is culturally responsive teaching. But culturally responsive teaching is just, a bit of the iceberg because we need culturally responsive learning. We need culturally responsive governing. We need culturally responsive cities. Our world is awakening to all the diversity that has been there, but has been marginalized. And we can't do that anymore. I mean, there are a lot of excuses for it, but at the heart of culturally responsive teaching, and a topic I want to address a little bit, is culture. And the culture is really about language, traditions, families, behaviors, friendship, relationship, time. And I know so many world language teachers know about this, so this isn't something new for them, but so many others are trying to be a part of it, but not understanding how to do it. It becomes a little bit more forced by the teaching world without giving a chance to dialogue with people about what does that mean in that situation. And I think about where so many of us were with culture. Now we have interculturality, we have practices, products, perspectives, your own compared to others. But we think about the iceberg of culture so much. We've been looking at or others have been looking at the top of the iceberg, what we all call the food fair, festivals, and fun, which really leads to a Frankenstein approach and look at the stereotypes of a culture. But down below are all the behaviors and the ideas of a culture that really is where you can have the deep thinking dialogue to make culturally responsive teaching more culturally responsive.
Toni, when you talked about setting up that spiders will build new webs and dismantle the old, part of what it sounds like is happening is that there are a lot of old webs that are not being taken down, that on which perhaps these new webs are overlaid. How do you work with bringing the awareness of culturally responsive teaching and learning to folks that are engaged with older forms?
Well, I could say very bluntly, one of the things we do with spider webs that kind of hang on in our garages in the summer is we take a power hose and blow them away. But that's really
Well,
that's
you do
really
that a lot.
that's really not the response to that because okay, why are we hanging on to those old webs? I think a lot of it has to do with some fear, but a lot of it is just not understanding the complexity of the situation. Well, like this morning from our district, because we have an, a brand new equity policy that's put into place
Okay.
and has a lot of good things to say, but sometimes we have an equity policy on paper. And they're trying with all, we have an equity director too, who's wonderful, who I've known for a long time, and who has been an equity director once here in another district. But the first time they were here, she was kind of like, "Well, we don't really need you anymore. We solved this problem." and but a lot of things are laid on her to solve it. I know there's not the intent to do it, but there's a lot of responsibility for all of that. And the first thing that she got herself involved with is the very high school that I taught at for many years. So it was the Loveland High Indians, and we've been trying to break down that mascot for years. So it just got really how it got taken care of was some of the rules that are happening through the state. So she was able to bring in that power hose and blow that right out of the water.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
within a month, it was changed. So, but that's still what, because that was a long conversation. And several times I have used that equity policy because in stating what we need is trying to bring in a new heritage, a Spanish heritage and native speaker course, that I responded in the form that we had to fill out in the presentation. I quoted from the equity policy, kind of in saying, okay, I know we have to have a dialogue, but let me just remind you, this is what you have said. and to, and to put those words in front of them. I said, we've got to make this useful along those lines. And to justify with that, I'm glad we have this equity policy because I've been able to use it in several ways. And one of the things that I did with that is I put some research in there that was in Spanish. And the colleagues that I was working with, they go, what if they can't read Spanish? And I said, well, my response is, it's not my fault they're monolingual. This is important information, and it needs to be there. So sometimes you have to kind of shout out a little bit and then massage them a little bit, and then bring them in. Like I was saying, we've got this infographic this morning about language for a more inclusive and supportive classroom. Here are some strategies in different environmental pieces, and that's from the director of education. And I appreciate that. Here it is. But it's just going to a small group of us. And so I think, and everybody's trying really hard, but, this, I really want to, direct some of this conversation to this. One of my main sources, there's some wonderful resources that I think that you are putting so people can see.
Indeed.
It's a book called Culturally Responsive Teaching and the Brain, Promoting Authentic Engagement and Rigor Among Culturally and Linguistically Diverse Students. It's by Zaretta Hammond. She really brings the brain into this in saying, yes, well, we still have, a lot of those state tests and achievement gaps, and a lot of those things are culturally set up for people to fail. I mean, you can't make yearly progress, usually because of, the group, the special education students, or the kids who are in English language development. So how would you like to be that kid that always causes the school to have to do things because that's who you are?
Yeah.
It's totally absurd. It's totally absurd. So she constantly talks about some things about lots of times the students who are in marginalized situations, for whatever that means, and that's not even a really good that's not even a good way to say it. Marginal. It is what they are, but they're kids in our classes, they're kids in our schools, they're people in our community, and all of this stuff. And she talks about, the dependent learner and the independent learner, and the marginalized students are quite often in the dependent area because, well, they can't move on till they master this, or they can't, um, they don't, and then things like the statement she says, they're dependent on the teacher to carry out most of the cognitive load. It's unsure of how to tackle a new task. Is because what is so important, we all know as world language teachers, is we need to know our students and where they come from and what they believe in and what they do. And we need to let them have a voice to acknowledge it. And what we need to do is the independent learner gets to experiences all these different things. But the dependent learner is always stuck in this box of, it's like recycling the same thing over again. If you think a little bit about it, it's kind of like, maybe not the best analogy, but if you're you see some people in a restaurant in another country and they don't speak that language, all they do is speak louder and say the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is the same thing. So we have to provide rigor for those students so they're challenged in the same way. Or they might fall down a few times more, but give them some more scaffolding. Let them be released from that box, you know? And, and when I think a little bit about this idea of a box, Amazon has this thing now about recycling the box. Is you can take the box and what you have in it and put it and start using it, and back in the box you can put old things to recycle, send it off and send it to Amazon and they'll recycle it. That's the same type of things as a spider, an old spider web. Put the old
Uh-huh.
spider web in there. Release these kids. And she uses the example about a kid, the teacher kind of goes up to the kids, and this doesn't happen all the time, but it's less and less. He said, well, you haven't turned in your homework, you haven't done your work, and da 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 da. And of course the kid, ashamed, says, I'll get it, I'll do it, and then the conversation ends. But you've given no new ways for that kid to do that. And so the constantly responsive and culturally responsive is not a set of strategies. It's a pedagogy. It's a belief. It's a belief that all kids can have successful paths for the way that they want to go, and we are still kind of looking at some things. Um, all of us know that, I would assume, and I'm just making an assumption, because one of the things she talks about in her book, she says that, when we give those opportunities, we build new brain neurons in that kid. And it's so like we build new webs in that kid's brain to expand what they want to do. And
Sounds like new pathways too.
exactly, and her book is just filled with some wonderful things like that. You constantly talk a little bit about uh, these pieces, but what's so important is the awareness piece. A person has to look at their beliefs and their bias a lot, and you have to keep examining that, and when you confront your own bias and put yourself in an uncomfortable situation, you have to think about, how do I feel and how am I reacting? And that's what I've been doing a little bit over these years now with starting the dual language program, because I was kind of like, here's the second language acquisition with world language, where do I apply it, but what is different? And I keep learning and I keep learning and I keep learning, but and then I want to hear from those involved in it. I want to be a good listener, because being listening, I can understand, and then I can open up new stages of dialogue and ask new questions to make things even better for those programs and those needs and the students involved. I just get excited with this, but that the whole thing about awareness and self-look at yourself, the other part of this is some teachers will say, well, there's so many kids from so many different places, that so many different languages. How do I look at all this? That's one of the ways that in teaching in many content areas is a way to say, I don't want to do this.
Mm, it can
Or,
be, certainly.
I'm going to have this activity for Black History Month. That's enough. Um, then we can go back to where we are regularly. But she says to take a look at that idea of culture from the individualistic piece and the collectivism piece, because 30% of the world's cultures are individualistic, ours being one of them, and we're at the top of the list. So the individual is almost to the point that it's selfishness. We're seeing some of that things played out a little bit in our culture just recently, where it's all for me and I get to do this. That's kind of like the independent person. But the collective cultures, which are like 70% of the cultures in the world, are about working for the group's betterment, helping out, bringing that dialogue in, and kind of having, that was Edward T. Hall's work and Hofstede's work about culture, helps people understand it. And there's even a chart that talks about at the level cultures are individualistic and collective. That's kind of a simplistic way to look at it. But, one of the pieces that's really important is the community of learning and the community of learning environments.
Okay,
You
talk more
know,
about that.
um, for example, with one of our dual language schools, uh, with a Title I, there are a lot of students who come from a trailer park close by. Well, school doesn't end just in school. Uh, the teachers and the community have community learning taking place in that trailer park. There's a community center. There's these two teachers that have lived there for a long time, who are teachers in our district, who really have organized this. So teachers come in to tutor. Uh, Learning keeps continuing, and because of that, you build relationships. Because it's more than just going into tutoring. You're meeting the families. You're talking. You're outside of your community to extend that dialogue. So it's that socio-cultural competence. Okay, I'm going to learn about the culture of these students so I can better serve them. And we can't put all the load on the teacher. It's the community, and it's, you know, I mean, just take a look at this whole deal with remote learning. There's a lot of burden put on the teacher to do just astounding, almost impossible things. And then, then the teachers get praised for just keep doing it, but you're burning them out. They can't take on the whole responsibility. And also by just kind of saying, well, that's their job anyhow. I mean, that kind of goes back to a long time ago that the majority of teachers are women. And women have, that's kind of their place to take care of children. I mean, look at even this pandemic of women that have elected to stay home for homeschooling that come from all types of professions. They're taking the hit and the burden, and that's an economic hit for them down the road, for retirement and their families and everything. We keep resorting back to the point that it's all on them. And so culturally responsible to be sustainable is about developing that community of learners, and create an environment that is intellectually and socially safe.
As a career educator and certified Gallup Strengths Coach, I engage with you and your team to bring energy, focus, and breakthroughs to all you do. Fluency Consulting provides workshops, presentations, talks, and team building events for K-16 educators and education-oriented organizations and businesses. Get energized, experience new insights, pathways, and perspectives. For more information, see our show notes or go to fluency.consulting.com. Toni, this is a lot bigger, obviously, than, say, a world language classroom or
Yes, yeah.
culturally responsive or awareness to those backgrounds that may be coming into the classroom or about which students are learning. This is a systemic aspect. Since you are in the midst of language, in the midst of cultural education, in the midst of having experienced this for decades, what is it that the language teaching and learning communities can bring that can help to transform? You're talking about a transformational approach to education in general. How can language and cultural education lead?
That was actually one of the points I wanted to get to. Because we have so much practice at it, we've got to turn around and start talking out of, we always talk to our inner circle. Everyone turn around, walk out of the circle, and start talking to others. One of the things that people get scared away from is like, oh, you'll just be dissed off. Oh, yeah, you're just that world language teacher. What do you know about these situations? Well, we're based in these pieces. So some of the things they might be able to do is because equity is a big word now. Culturally responsive is a big word, but people don't really know what all of that means and how hard the work is. So sometimes you can start off by volunteering in the community. There's like the teachers going to the community center with a group of students close to our school in the trailer park. But you can also volunteer to do some things. For example, if in a school meeting that you have, or say that I know one of our topics is equity. Can we share some of the things that from our content area has really supported the use of culture? Because, there's still a lot of beliefs about language learning is you learn a bunch of words. Every year you add more words. Culture is the tip of the iceberg and nothing really serious is going on. We're getting better at that people are believing more. You're making headways into this, but there's still a lot of it. I mean, you can be a real strong force in your school community because you have the knowledge of it. And in a lot of places you're starting to become a core piece of the curriculum, but you can be so easily pushed back in the corner when you don't service them anymore. You resist the push. You stand up and go, no, we're going to be here now. And I think disruption is so important. You can do disruption politely and assertively, because lots of times when you look, there are a lot of the students that come back to us, particularly our students who may come from different cultures and languages, etc., to kind of get grounded a little bit of what's happening. School community of dual language, We have some teachers from the Teachers from Spain program. I'm the coordinator of getting them and bringing them, but that's just like not how school is going. I'm constantly helping them out in situations. I'm helping them find a place to live. The other day, they didn't understand why their garbage wasn't being picked up. I had to take one of them to the hospital because they didn't understand the medical system. Checking in to make sure they're okay because they haven't been able to see their families for 2 years. So that's part of that culturally responsive piece because I understand the cultural aspects of that in it. But part of my job is to teach others because I don't want to just hold all of this. Everybody can help. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. It's interesting because part of the definition that you provided about culturally responsive teaching had to do with making meaningful connections between what students learn in school and their life experiences and finding the relevance between what they're learning and their lives. But you're also very much sounding like you're describing that same process for those that are educators.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, and community members, and community members. I've had several opportunities and asked for several opportunities to speak to the Rotary organizations in my town because they were really interested about dual language. That's kind of become a buzzword, and they wanted to know what that means. I've gone to the school board. I'll take any place at all to talk, and and to show off what this is doing. I mean, we even have some data with our first cohort group that went through, particularly the one school that was a Title I school. There was always a turnaround school. Well, when the first group got to the reading, level three, grade three, when you start talking about reading tests, etc., that school moved from turnaround to proficiency and one of the highest proficiencies in the district. And people were going, well, what did they do? How did they do that? A little bit of denial that you can't possibly be in that position. And my response was, let's take a look at the research of dual language. They're getting double literacy. Let's take a look at what we are providing with that to that child, because you only learn to read once, but you can be supported about different ways to learn and take in information through different cultural perspectives. You know, and I want to talk a little bit about this piece about kinder kids. When you talk about learning sounds, etc., there's a big battle now. Should we go to more phonemic awareness and the science of reading? Well, when you take the vowel sounds in English, produces 16 sounds. So there's all these things you have to learn and work, and a lot of it has to be memorized because it's crazy as anything. In
True.
Spanish, you got 5 vowels and 5 sounds. Let's move on. So they can start to pick up reading and sound and etc. Because Spanish is so easy to read along these words. They don't need sight words. They need help with the coding. So you can't just say, let's learn about reading. And that's what's so wonderful about people who come from other places to teach in our schools that offer those, multicultural lenses and culturally relevant lenses and equity lenses. We need to have people have more equity lenses to make it
Equity lenses. Equity lenses. And you have so much personal history of leadership and success with creating standards. Help us to understand. You've got folks that will try to understand what you mean, who will be of goodwill to try to understand what you mean, but may need that scaffolding that you talked about earlier in this conversation. How does this approach get embedded into a system that those with less vision but desire to help can participate in, can succeed in, Toni?
Well, I think one of the things that has to happen, it has to become a priority. And, our district is becoming a priority. They're still figuring out a little bit about what that is. But we can be a little, as language people, we can be a little bit more uh, insistent that we look at these pieces because let's just take a look at the demographics of our country. There is so much diversity. If we're not looking at through these equity lenses, we're missing out. When people come with multicultural perspectives, creativity can change, and we can open up our country. We can have, economics can change, communities can change, governments can change, because we're looking at different ways to do things and honoring the voice of all. I mean, as simple as in a classroom. I mean, lots of times if you think of a language teacher, or what we want to make help other teachers understand in the sustainability piece of culturally responsive, we are the bridge between one culture and another. So through that bridge, how do we provide different ways for those students to access? They have some, again, opportunities to critically think and create, not just sit in the corner and do low-level stuff of repetition one more time, but actually seeing what they can do. And quite often we learn from them about the possibilities. So I think what we have to keep plugging at it. We have to keep disrupting. Whomever wants to be in it. And it's not just language teachers. And who wants to be part of this wonderful transition in our world society? Because we are a global community. Blasting out part of the old webs is believing that we're just an isolated country that all thinks the same. And when we have Black History Month, that everyone in Black History Month, that's a monoculture perspective. When we want to talk about Latinos, every Latino is the same. You're forgetting about the uniqueness. So I don't have the answer to that. I just say if you want to be part of this discovery, and because we feel better when more people are included. I would think in a general view of this. So scaffolding comes from we're all dialoguing and finding new scaffolds. When you think about, we can think of a scaffolding piece as a single piece, like when you're trying to fix a roof on one's house, or we can look at scaffolding when we're trying to repair a Gothic cathedral, which is just many, many facets, or when we're trying to build a skyscraper. That a scaffolding is lots of different places to jump around on.
Yeah, it's interesting because you don't necessarily have a system, but you have an invitation, and you return to the concept we started out this conversation, namely that it's a dialogue. We invite that dialogue, and that's how
Right.
we begin to learn, and that our students and our colleagues from all over the world have input to provide us.
Yep.
You have so many resources that I have indeed on the website here for people to take a look at. And Toni, what I'd like to do is, first of all, invite you to recommend, again, the looking at those resources and what they might mean. And then I've got one more question for you. When you have the resources there, what do you hope that the listeners will get from accessing the resources as well as this podcast?
Be a part of the dialogue at any time they want. And these are just a tiny bit of the resources. So start stepping into it and see what others are writing about and give us some thought and what can I do about this and how can I open up to others? There's some things about getting started with culturally responsive teaching. I really do like this book about culturally responsive teaching in the brain. There's all kinds of study with, you know, multicultural. You're talking like social injustice. What interests you? What parts do you want to get into? And you can't say, well, I'm too busy. Are we too busy not to think really about, if we only think about what we're teaching and doing and not the student, it's the student. It is the child that we're developing and moving forward in a tiny way that we have. And it might mean that we throw out this piece. We don't need this. We need to listen to that child's voice and find out that voice also to be amplified and shared with others. You don't want to keep those secrets. Kids create and do things, put them out in the world. I mean, there's so many ways to do that now. They need different audiences. Find ways for them to do that. Also look for books that are written by people from other country or in our own communities from different language groups. There's a wonderful book that's called In Comunidad, Lessons for Centering the Voices and Experiences of bilingual and Latinx students. I attended a webinar with that, and I have the book, and it's just, there's a lot of really interesting ways to perceive that I would never have perceived it because I come from a different cultural framework. But now it's part of my big scaffolding piece.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Interesting.
so
Interesting.
keep building the parts of the scaffolding. Join the spiders to build some web.
Well, and that's what I was going to turn to you and say, when you turn to this audience that is listening to you, and you have an opportunity for one more exhortation or one more invitation,
Oh,
one more warning, what would you say?
join the dialogue. Don't be afraid to join the dialogue. There's so many of those dialogues going on. And you enter one and it's not exactly what you want, move on. But don't be a monologue.
What do you think will emerge?
A lot more robust, caring, multicultural conversations, communities, and action. I think our talking will turn into action.
You know, if people will discover for themselves the freedom, the experimentation personality, as well as the caring for others, Toni, that you have brought to your work in the world language community over these years, they would do well indeed. It would be a great start. Thanks for sharing that today on the
Thank you
podcast.
very much. Thank you. That was very kind. Thank you to all of you. I think that my email address is part of what's on the website. You can contact me at any time. I love to talk, obviously.
And I can certainly follow through by saying, yes, she'll welcome your contact, friends. So go for it. In case you thought that she was just kidding about that. She's not. Go for it. So, Toni, again, thank you very much. And I really
Welcome.
appreciate your spending time today with us. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with your friends, family, and colleagues. Let's continue the conversation. Be sure to check out my website, fluencyonline.com, to learn more about our guests and to check out the resources and information they've shared with us there. I have other ideas, resources, and opportunities there for you too. Again, thanks so much for listening, and until next time.